From London. I know we have a very global audience with us today, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to this webinar on the topic of public sector transformation, and in particular, how to get public sector leaders and frontline staff working effectively together. I'm Siobhan Bonita, I'm a former UK civil servant, and it's my pleasure to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, the publishing house that serves civil servants around the world, and our knowledge partner today, Unit 4. So in terms of the topic today, the last 2 years, I think it's fair to say, have really seen unprecedented pressure placed on the public sector. And there are still huge challenges ahead now, with the public finances being incredibly tight, global economic uncertainty, and changing expectations from citizens about how they want their public services to be delivered. So today we're going to hear findings from research carried out by Unit 4, providing insights into how policymakers and frontline service deliverers have responded to some of these challenges and where the main barriers still lie to effective transformation. Using some real-life case studies, we'll also look at the role of technology and innovation in facilitating change, as well as the importance of effective communication and collaboration between leaders and staff right across that delivery landscape. We've got 3 great speakers with us here today, and I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But this is also just a chance to say that you can put your questions to the speakers. So in whichever device you are using today, you should be able to see a Q&A button somewhere. Please, at any point from now on, use that Q&A button to message in your questions, and we will get through as many of those questions as we can before the end of the webinar. And you can ask our experts absolutely anything that you like. So in terms of today's speakers, first we will hear from Greg Beaumont, who is the Director of Public Sector Sales at Unit 4, where he's focused on helping public sector organisations transform work into truly meaningful experiences via technology. Greg has been working in the Canadian public sector market for more than 20 years and is currently based in Vancouver. Then we will hear from Audrey Clements, who is Chief Operating Officer of Hoople, where she has been since its inception in April 2011. As a qualified accountant, Audrey has 25 years experience of finance services in both the public and private sectors, and she has a passion for developing staff and delivering high quality services to all customers. And last but not least, we will hear from Tanya Garrett, who oversees Unit 4's People Success function, where she's responsible for issues including talent acquisition, learning and development, and the regional HR field teams. With more than 2 decades of human resources experience, Tanya is well versed in providing HR leadership in high growth businesses. She has a proven track record in organizational design and leading multi-locational teams to deliver high level employee experiences. So I'm sure you'll agree, we really do have a fantastic panel here today. As I say, please take this opportunity to send in your questions using that Q&A feature. But without further ado, I'm going to invite Greg to give us some opening remarks. Over to you, Greg.
Great, thank you very much, Siobhan. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. I know we have a global audience. Myself, I'm in Vancouver, as mentioned. Background in public sector, worked in public sector, then moved over to the software side. I think the introduction was strong, so why don't we just jump into the next slide. So who is Unit 4? For some of you, you may have never heard of Unit 4 before. We have a succinct way of looking at ourselves. We are the leader in enterprise software for people-centric organizations. And the key word here is people. We focus on organizations where people are their product. We're not focused on manufacturing, supply chain, distribution, etc. We're truly focused on government, nonprofits, higher education, and professional services firms. So it allows us to really reach into those key verticals and understand why they do business the way they do business and how they need to transform to keep pace with the modern world. Next slide. We'll talk a bit about, when we talk a bit about who is Unit 4, what is the product? When we look at the product on the left, it's a generic style of what ERP used to be, when it was very much focused around products. It was supply chain oriented. It was all about how do we make something, standardize it as much as possible to get to drive costs down, to then ship out those products and manage them on the cheapest basis possible. That changes dramatically when you look into a people-centric model. Here we're focused on what information can we get for people? What information can people achieve through this so that they can make better decisions? It's a very different way of looking at ERP. It's much more focused on the individuals, workflowing information between them so that the last person with the information is able to make a proper decision and, most importantly, get back to serving the customer. It's away from the ERP running you, but instead it's running the way your organization needs to work. The complex needs, especially of the public sector, where if you think about it, nobody else in the world would ever run an organization as diverse as a public sector. Even multinational conglomerates are much more holistic and similar to themselves than a public sector organization that may have to regulate someone, provide housing to somebody else, provide recreational services to a third party, and all of that maintains the political organization that is elected behind it. So it's a very different organizations that need simplistic, easy to use, but people-centric ERP. Thank you. We look at what Unit 4 provides, and we combine three major functionalities of human capital management, financials, and financial planning and analysis capabilities. These three areas combine to form your core ERP. It allows you to manage your budgets, your people, and then your transactions as they happen. It's that combination of everything together, a strong user experience with lots of automation on a modern cloud platform with extensibility, meaning we can work with all of your other products. We integrate very strongly with those other systems, allowing you to work in the foreground and the system to take care of all the work in the background. Lastly, we focused on, as I mentioned, public sector and the other verticals. We have that industry functionality that out of the box works for you in the public sector. So the reason we're here is to talk about the state of the digital nation. As you are likely aware, we've done an extensive survey of over 600 public sector employees working in transformation across the world. Countries such as Australia, the United States, Great Britain, Canada, the Benelux, Sweden, all throughout Europe, Canada, and Asia Pac, we've looked into how do people work, what is happening, what type of transformations are they able to do? What are the relationships between these behaviors and processes? How are we supporting and enabling change, or perhaps how are we resisting change, and why are we resisting change? As we all know, humans love to resist change. We all like to complain. We all like to say why it's too hard, why we can't do it. Instead, today we want to talk about why we must do it. It's no longer an opportunity to do a little better. It's now a requirement to serve our residents, to serve our citizens, and to serve our people generally in a better way. What will the future look like in this ideal world? With those 600 participants, we're looking at not just what happened during COVID, but now we're in post-COVID. We still have the impact. We still have the impact on our health services. So what can we do at this point to keep supporting it and, more importantly, transform? And we'll talk a bit about this survey and how we see it coming together to allow you to work better and work stronger. Next slide. If you look at this, it just basically means everyone. We're at such high numbers here. 99% have seen major changes to their services or to their targets, and 95% have struggled to adapt. 95%, so that's really everyone. And we all felt it during COVID. Everybody had to move to Teams. And I was fascinated by how well the public sector managed. The public sector couldn't just stop picking up garbage. They couldn't just stop delivering health services. All of that had to continue. And the way people were able to adapt was really quite amazing. But what happened is we adapted because we had to without a plan. And so it worked and it survived, but it's not set up for the future. And so it's how do we now transform to ensure all the gains we've made, we can keep them, our people don't burn out, and we're able to provide those services on an ongoing basis for the foreseeable future. If we look at these numbers, though, what it says is everybody's under this pressure. So it's our responsibility to help them succeed under that pressure. If we move to the next slide, we'll see that there's a high degree of people resisting change, not quite half, a little bit more than a third. And why was that? It was both the leadership and the workforce. And of course, it was their systems not allowing them to change. So yes, they were able to work from home, but they were doing twice as much work to make sure it all flowed properly. Or they're taking turns coming to the office being very inefficient. So there are a lot of different issues that happened around that, which also then influenced how people felt about it. When you put that type of stress on the worker, the workforce will resist change. When the workers have that issue and the systems aren't working, the leadership then resists change. And we look at why. Lack of agile back office, needing the right skill sets, to plan well, to be able to react with knowledge versus just a pure reaction. And of course, aversion to change that we all have, though, that I mentioned earlier. So how do we get through that? Where are the struggles and what can we alleviate relatively easily? What's going to take a lot more work? Next slide. So that digital transformation was already top of the agenda before COVID. And if we look how long it takes, that's longer than we've been in COVID almost. So it's not a matter of something just simple that we can do tomorrow, flick it on and it's done. We all know that in public sector needs to be done correctly and properly. We have a lot of ongoing services that cannot be disrupted. So we have to find a way to do the transformation while we're doing that. And if we look at the numbers, 95% have considered this, or sorry, 95% say they have some sort of transformation strategy, but only 29% consider it fully implemented. So whether it was pre-COVID or during COVID, it was that lack of will through lack of financials, or it was lack of capabilities, lack of old systems, dealing with updated legacy systems during that, and finally trying to take on more cloud-based services. All of that makes digital transformation a tough thing to do, but not impossible. Next slide. Where we start to see the solutions is as we do the transformation, we see some of our departments and divisions within our organizations. 85 agree that back office transformation made their role easier. That's a huge number. It made it easier. And so that's where we need to strive. 95% believe that improvements are still needed. So that shows that people are engaged. They see this as a positive and they want the improvements to continue. They want to get better. However, 86% also find they don't have the right skills or training to adapt. So how do we support them better? A lot of people were just thrown into Zoom calls, thrown into working from home. Just make it work was what we told them. Well, we had to. That's the situation we're in. Now's the time to ensure we can give our people the right skills, the right training, so that they can adapt to the new normal and they can become successful employees for us. So what is this ideal work like? I'm going to start at number 4. We're going to manage the cost better. We're oversight of expenditure, income, and budget. Now, realistically, we all should have been doing that already. That never really should have changed. So we got to do better than that. So we can automate our skills deployment. We can fit the right skills to the right job, ensuring that the right people are in the right roles. It's amazing that how much during this transformational change that we've all undergone, how many people have said, I don't feel like I'm in the right job anymore. My job has changed significantly and I'm not enjoying it. We had the great resignation. We've had tons of people moving into different positions. So it's ensuring that the right skills are applied to the right job, or the right people are in the right positions and helping them move. Not an easy task in the public sector. We need to be using predictive analytics to help us with better workforce planning, but it's really ensuring we have real-time data, real-time access to important up-to-date information, that it's fed to us rather than us having to go hunting and pecking for it, that it's automated so that we get the right information at the right time when we need it. All in all, bringing these 4 categories together, we'll have an ideal work world that we can be successful and, most importantly, help our residents and citizens succeed and move forward with the services we're offering. Okay. So next slide. So here we're going to have a link put into the chat for a document that we talk about the state of the digital nation in the public sector. A bit of background reading for anyone that's interested. Please feel free to download a copy. At this point, I'm going to pass it back to Siobhan. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Greg. Great way to start there, because setting out the findings of that report there, lots of issues that I think the audience will really be familiar with. So as you said, digital transformation is something that lots of organizations will have been working on even before the pandemic, but the pandemic really sped up the need for that transformation. And as you say, lots of the public sector did adapt really well, but it was in that emergency kind of context. So how do you kind of put that now on a sustainable footing? Lots of the issues that you raised there around legacy systems, around skills and training, around better use of data, getting that up-to-date information, making sure that people are in the right jobs for the skills that they have and training for the future. And I really like what you said at the beginning, which is there is still this resistance to change, but it's not an option now. Change is a requirement. So we're going to have to work out how to do this. Thank you so much, Greg. And just to say to the audience, we will also send that link, the link that's gone in the chat. We'll make sure we email that out to everybody who is registered as well. Thanks, Greg. Audrey, I'm now coming over to you.
Hi, thank you. Welcome to everybody, and thank you for taking the time this afternoon. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is quite a busy slide, but this is just to give you a little bit of scope of what Hoople is about. Hoople is a Techel company, and we have 3 shareholders: Herefordshire County Council, Wye Valley NHS Trust, and Lincolnshire County Council. So we're very predominantly providing, I think, at least 86% of our services are straight into public sector organisations. We've been going for about, well, we just started our 12th year, and the company is growing on a kind of annual basis as we take on new services. And the part of this slide just gives you a kind of sense of the range of services that we offer. This deals with kind of IT services, training, educational, HR and payroll, recruitment, the finances, revenues and benefits, and building maintenance and cleaning. And we've recently expanded into a Hoople Care brand as well, where we're delivering care services, which is very much around meeting the needs of our shareholders and what our shareholders need in this current market. If we could move to the next slide, please. So we have our Hoople values, and these are still probably as important to us today as they were when we started them 12 years ago. Very much around how we focus on our customers, how we focus on our kind of improvements and professional integrity. And a really big thing for me in our values is around mutual support and how we look out for each other as a staff group and how we support each other to develop and grow. And really important that we live our values and don't just talk about them. These are very much things that we feel are integrated into the way that we work on a daily basis, not just something we put on the wall. If we can move to the next slide, please. The challenge as we see it for many organisations really is dealing with how we now make changes. As it's already been said, the pandemic absolutely fundamentally changed the way that we worked, changed how we worked, where we worked, and the volume of work, I think, within the public sector just spiraled. We really saw massive increases, whether it was dishing out laptops so that people could work from home, and numerous amounts of government grants that needed to be filtered and dealt with, and money got out to businesses and individuals. The volume of work just spiraled. And really, we've seen that continuously for the last couple of years. It hasn't tailed down as the time has gone on. So when we talk about transformation, it's almost that how do we get into being able to have time to transform when we're still dealing with that kind of volume of work? How can we make that really kind of come to take that forward? And a lot of us are finding that actually just coping with what we have to do, the here and now, the today, is almost, you know, enough without having to look at transformation. Transformation is often seen as the kind of long-term objective, what we'll get to when we have time and resources, when we have time in the future, when we have time to look down and think about where we want to go. We have, big enough challenges, almost stabilizing where we've got to in the last 2 years, and just being able to kind of go through where managing what we have to deal with at the moment. And obviously the economic environment at the moment, as we know, is volatile and it's risky. And this is, a dangerous time to be making lots of changes. And yet, as we've already said across the webinar, change needs to happen. We need to be using transformation. That needs to be the way forward. We will only tackle the challenges ahead of us if we make those transformational changes. If we could go to the next slide. This is the kind of Hoople approach, as it were, to transformation. We provide a stable and tried and tested business world template to our clients. And our strategy has been very much to make those step improvements, but listening very much to what our business and what our customer priorities are, so that we're making small, steady steps continuously. We have a 5-year strategy. But this is very much tied into trying to give our customers that experience of some big ticket items, some big development, but also the smaller ongoing developments, so that they're seeing that continuous improvement as we move through each year. We work on a basis of trying to do the transition, then make sure we stabilize. And I think that stabilization part is really important. When we see such transformation that we have in the last 2 years, actually being able to stabilize and focus and restart again on the next part of the transformation is really key to making sure that we've got a stable base that we're building on. We refresh our strategy continuously. We keep adapting that to meet with the changing priorities of our shareholders, and also so that we make sure that we exploit, as much functionality of the new products as they come through. And we have a kind of constant change steps through the year, so that we can continuously see how those steps are changing and what foundations we're building on and what benefits they will deliver to our shareholders as we move through the year. If we could move to the next slide, please. So probably the biggest issue that we face is staff recruitment and staff retention. For us, staff are absolutely everything to our success. They are the people that deliver all of the services on a face-to-face or virtual basis, and it's absolutely key that we listen to them and understand what their needs and how we can support them. Employee engagement, working with our staff is everything that we do, really, and make sure that we are listening to their views. We do a lot of stuff around encouraging feedback, encouraging open kind of conversations, a lot of quick snap surveys, so that we can get a few questions out there and get some feedback on that quickly, rather than long kind of staff questionnaires, which I think don't always motivate our staff to feedback. We've done a lot of work as well in the last couple of years around welfare, about mental health awareness training, and trying to support our staff so that they feel that they have a safe environment when they come to work, where they can share whatever is going on in their lives. Sometimes, there's a lot going on outside of work that's impacting that. Rising costs at the moment are impacting everybody across the world. We're seeing a lot of price increases and a lot of inflation increases, and that's having a real impact on staff on a day-to-day basis. So we've been looking at where we can support staff. Salary would be great. It would be great if we could pay everybody what they'd like to be paid, and put on cost of living increases, but it's just not sustainable for us to continue to do that. So we're having to look creatively around what we can do with salary sacrifice schemes. We've just gone with a salary sacrifice pension scheme to enable more of the money that people earn back in their pockets. We're trying to offer things around discounts with local businesses, and looking at the way that we travel around our county as well, so that we can look at how we can help people with the cost of travel at the moment. How do we really get people to stay within the organisation? I think the only way that we really can, people can work wherever they want in the world now. So the opportunities are, we've got to make Hoople an appealing place for people to want to work. And we do that through trying to offer training courses and support and development, and also having those technology developments, those interesting projects. It's almost like we need to have the most challenging problem so that we've got something that attracts the most talent to come and want to work on that with us. So we need to be continuously looking at how we can use technology and development opportunities to be able to ensure that we are giving those opportunities to staff so that they can grow within their roles, and hopefully that helps us to retain them. The way we work has changed forever. We now operate very much a hybrid model between working from home and working in an office space. And I think there is a sweet spot in this. It's probably different for all of our staff groups and all of our staff individually, but that real work-life balance, that is there. You can see the opportunity for us to be able to get that, where people can have a real good balance between being at work and taking time away from work. And we're working really closely with the staff at the moment to try and identify how that works best with them, and try not to have just a one-size-fits-all model. And actually the office isn't the answer. Working from home has worked very effectively for the last couple of years, and we would like to continue that. At the same time, there is some great benefits from people being able to work together as teams. And when we're looking at transformation and development, it's really important that we have the opportunity for people to be able to collaborate and work together. And so some working and some team working, and that team spirit is really important to be able to maintain. So there is a balance between, I think, working from home and working in the office. The last slide was just to say thank you very much for listening, and I'll be interested in your questions at later on in the session.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Audrey. And I'm sure, yeah, to the audience, please do get your questions coming in. But some things that really struck me there, as you say, the importance of values, keeping the values as you go through these change programs and transformation programs. So you picked out in particular mutual support, but also just that engagement with staff and getting feedback from your staff throughout a lot of these transformative programs. Other big issues there around how technology can play a role in making companies like Hoople an attractive place to be, because that constant challenge of kind of recruitment and retention of staff is something that I think a lot of people, especially in the public sector, will be dealing with. And then just the role of technology, I think, in the future of work. So in this hybrid future, and as companies and public sector organizations are trying to find out what is that balance in getting the kind of work, home working versus back in the office where people want it to be. So thanks so much, Audrey, really good to get that perspective. And now Tanya, I'm coming back to you from Unit 4.
Lovely, thank you. Well, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, and nice to be here with all of you. So I think you know, there are two words which really do strike fear into the hearts of most people and organisation, and they are change and transformation, typically because people don't often know what that means, and they don't know what it means as a general kind of thing, and they also don't know what it means for them. So I think what I want to talk about this afternoon is just the importance of ensuring that your people are really on board as you go through any change and any transformation, and particularly digital transformation. And, you know, driving successful change is challenging. And our findings have told us that in the public sector, there's some real issues that are getting in the way of change. And when it comes to confidence level of successful transformation taking place, which, and by successful, we mean on time, in budget, and actually being used once it's in place, we see there's some key drivers. The first one is there's a lack of alignment between different departments and teams. And this is a really high number here, you can see at 50%. And so 50% of people really don't believe that everybody is aligned around the need for transformation or what that transformation is going to look like. The next factor is that staff lack the right skill set or experience, and this comes in at 32%. And I'll come on to that later. And finally, the lack of leadership, which is coming in at 21%. And those three things are really disheartening when it comes to thinking about the journey of change and transformation when that needs to occur. But I think the thing that came out in the report that was probably the most impactful, and I think the thing where we really need to spend time thinking about closing this gap was the difference between top management and mid-management. Top management came across as being very clear. They felt they knew why transformation was happening. They had confidence that it would get done, and they felt that they would adapt after that transformation had happened. But the drop from senior leadership to mid-management was incredible. So what it tells us is that there are people at the top of the organizations who understand this, but that message hasn't translated down through the organization, which therefore means change inevitably will be resisted and will be very difficult to achieve. And if we can go on to the next slide, please. So, as I said, one of the things that we found in this report was that not only were people resistant to the change itself, but people were also resistant once the change had happened. So adapting to that change was also really, really difficult. And on this slide, as you can see here, 44% of leaders, once a change had taken place, resisted that change. And 42% of staff resisted the change as well, which meant that even if it had happened, it was almost a waste of time. So how can you overcome that? Well, it's difficult. The single biggest issue when you're going through any change is lack of alignment, and that's whether, the lack of alignment around the need for change or how that change will happen. And also change management. This is something that's often discussed, and the term is thrown around quite loosely. And it's often overlooked, but it is always the single biggest derailer to any change program if it's not taken seriously. And to overcome this, change management plans must be established, and they must include a couple of things. First and foremostly, the reason for change must be really clear and really compelling. People need to understand why it's being done, and they need to be able to connect the reason of the change to their day jobs or how it's going to improve things for them. So you really have to define what are the benefits of that change. Is it time saving? Is it cost saving? Is it improved skills that individuals can build as a result of this change? Whatever it is, that needs to be articulated. And you also need to ensure that mid-management, who are very often the closest people to the front line, are on board. And if they're not on board, use them. Use them to understand where the gaps are, use them to understand what the issues are. The people on the front line and that mid-management level are very often the people who experience the pain that is the reason for the need for change. So speak to them, involve them, and if you have people who are resistant, bring them inside the tent and use them to your advantage to become change agents as you go through a process. But also involve the front line and in that planning and implementation where possible. Your users, your end users, are going to be the very people who are going to be able to define your processes and what needs to be improved and how systems can be utilized to do that. And so that stakeholder evangelism is really, really important, both at the top end of the organization and all the way down, if you want to stand a chance of closing those gaps. And I think also you have to be ready to review and iterate. Very often plans are put in place that are fixed up front and people don't want to deviate from those plans. But actually, if you don't press pause, review and iterate and change, that's where the mistakes will happen, and that's where the resistance will come. If you're not listening to that input or you're not willing to iterate and change, then it will be very difficult for people to want to adapt to that change once it's in place. Be ready to answer the questions, what's in it for me, or what does it mean for me? Most people, when they, as I said, you say change, you say transformation, people are immediately threatened by those two words. So going through any change program, if you tell people what does it mean for them, and oftentimes change is actually an improvement, as Greg said earlier, this is going to streamline back office processes. It will make your life ultimately less painful, and therefore being able to say to people, this is what it means for you, is really very helpful as you go through change. And be transparent and open is one thing that I would always advocate for. But finally, communication is key. You cannot communicate enough when you're going through a change program. And as somebody wise once said to me, once you are sick of hearing yourself say it, somebody will be hearing it for the very first time. So communication is utterly critical. And, you know, I think ultimately success comes down to people who embrace change, the people who deliver change, and the people who will live with that change once it's implemented. Siobhan, back to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tanya, for that. I mean, picked up lots of things there. So as you say, the findings showing that some key barriers, so lack of alignment between departments, lack of skills and training of staff, lack of leadership, and then really that big issue between the gap between senior management and mid-management on kind of understanding the benefits of change, getting behind the change program. So it's not cascading down already through the organization. And then just that real sense of needing a change management plan that's very clear on the reason for change and getting that mid-management on board. So setting out really practical advice there, which I know will be very helpful for people in the audience. So I want to kick off with a couple of questions that we've had come in advance, and then just a reminder to the audience, please do start getting your questions in. But Greg, I want to come back to you because it's nice that we've heard a lot about people in this, because I think when we hear about transformation, quite often people immediately think about kind of the technology and everything. So I am going to talk about the people side of things in a moment, but you all touched on kind of the importance of getting those back office systems change, using data differently, modernizing kind of legacy systems. Do you think some of the resistance around some of this change is that people have worries about doing things differently? So when it comes to data, for example, and moving, say, to cloud, are people, do you think, worried about kind of security issues? Do you think there's a kind of lack of understanding here? Is that part of the problem as well?
Yes, I do think that is definitely part of the problem. A lot of it comes from risk awareness and how well we're able to manage that risk. Utilizing the cloud means that you entrust a lot of that to your vendor. And that can be scary for a lot of public sector organizations that have built teams to manage that themselves. But the reality is your typical cloud vendors have hundreds of people involved in securing your data. There's people that are directly involved ensuring that the platform will never fail. And if it does fail, that there's failovers and backups and other ways of managing it. They have people managing intrusion, people managing penetration, people managing all these other aspects of digital security. And that's all they do. And they're experts at it. Versus our typical public sector IT department that has to do everything for the organization and might have one person that's involved in security, and then others join in as necessary. But that's really transforming is saying, well, let's go to the expert that actually managed it. Let's look and see what their skill sets are and what type of I'm sorry, I've lost the word. Skills and certifications they have, you know, ISO certifications, SOC certifications, things along those lines, and then trusting that. So it's a big step, but I think it's one that's critical, and it's been shown to be proven the right way to work and taking advantage of the knowledge of your vendor.
But do you think there's a particular kind of culture or mindset in the public sector, which is we hold data that's really sensitive, you know, it's citizens' data, it's different. We're not the same as the private sector, therefore only we can do this and build this in a way that we know is safe.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in government myself, and that's a very, you know, it's a real truism, because, you know, when I have your medical data, when I have your sexual orientation data, when I have any personal data of yours, you want to be 100% sure that I'm not going to mess with it. Our organization isn't going to have a problem with that. So it is seen that way. However, what we have to realize is the modern vendors, for example, Unit 4 in Canada, the data cannot leave. We have set it up with Microsoft Azure to ensure that that cannot happen. And the same holds true in the UK, the same holds true in Sweden, in Australia, et cetera, et cetera. So that those regulations that government falls under, the Protection of Privacy Acts and the Freedom of Information Acts, are adhered to very tightly by the vendor.
Thanks, Greg. Audrey, I'm coming back to you on, you talked about kind of the importance of values and keeping your staff kind of engaged. What was the most difficult challenges that you faced during the pandemic period? So in terms of kind of how were you adapting very quickly? How did you have to adapt? How did your staff have to adapt? And what were the most difficult things that you found during that period?
I think, I mean, prior to the pandemic, everybody had been working in an office. So just initially that shock of kind of going home, and I think everybody kind of thought it was going to be for 6 weeks, you know, oh, well, I'll pack up my stuff, but I'll leave my plant here because it's still going to be back. And, you know, we found fridges still with milk in and stuff. Everybody thought they were coming back in. So I think that initial part of just the shock of actually, and you saw people a lot working on their sofas and working, you know, not set up properly for being able to work from home. And I know a number of people had all of the problems with their children and other people being in the house that suddenly kind of disrupted their work. So I think initially just the shock of actually this is going to be for a period of time and you need to establish yourself at home and have a base, a desk, an office to be able to operate your job was probably the shock of it. I think we have over the last 2 years, as COVID has gone on, there is a fatigue. There is an element of people kind of saying, we're tired now. We've been doing this. You know, the volume of work has increased. The first kind of couple of months, everybody's a little bit more like, oh yeah, we're going to do this. We can make this work and step up and jump up and, you know, kind of roll their sleeves up and get involved in it. And then after a period of time, you get a bit like, can I keep doing this? Nobody's had a proper holiday. Nobody's really had a break from their home. And I think one of my biggest fears for the staff was everybody was suddenly working longer hours. You know, you haven't got that drive to work, so you log on a bit earlier. Okay, you might stop and take the dog for a walk or whatever, but work is there. It's in your home all the time. And you know, people were working later into the evenings. Oh, I'll just get that report finished because I've got time to do that. So I think all of those things kind of really impacted on the staff's well-being, their health, all of those things. So we've done a lot of stuff in the last couple of months to really kind of, or 6 months, I guess, really just trying to get people to reassess how they're going to work now, how they're going to make working from home and working in the office actually work for them. So it's a positive experience for them. Because yeah, there was a lot of elements where and we did some stuff around making sure that people had a working from home allowance and things so that they could actually set themselves up properly with a desk and have that work environment to be able to have that kind of ongoing thing. So but yeah, definitely some big challenges in just being able to just work effectively. Although all the technology did work for us, and it's amazing how much people adapted to that side of it. That seemed to almost become, you know, apart from the I'm on mute conversations, everything else they did, and the technology was there to support us. So it did show us what was the art of the possible. And I think if you'd have asked me 2.5 years ago, I'd have said, no, I need to go to the office every day. And yet now I would, you know, I do enjoy going to the office. I enjoy seeing people, but I don't feel the need to do it to be able to do my role. So that's, you know.
Certainly, I think one of the kind of positive legacies is people are embracing more that kind of use of technology to stay connected in those different ways. I want to come to you now, come back on something that you said. So you ended your opening remarks by stressing the importance of communication, like really key in all of this. Does that communication around change and around transformation become harder as we are in a hybrid future? So you don't have everybody all in one place. Does that kind of hybrid working make communication harder? And does it actually make transformation just harder more generally because you're not all in the same place together physically?
I don't think so. I mean, you know, just to pick up on what Audrey said, you know, we did this for 2 years almost, and we're still doing it. And I think in a lot of ways, what the pandemic and having to be at home taught us is actually how to be better communicators when not doing it in person. And I think that, you know, it's, and I know lots of people on the call won't have to juggle with these things, but I think it made things like dealing with time zones much easier, and you know, people's availability was more structured. Whereas I think when you try and do it in person, you know, you're always sort of wondering whether, well, who's going to turn up and have we got enough space, and all of the effort goes into the logistics. When I think when you're doing it virtually, actually your content becomes the most important message. So I don't think it hurts it necessarily. I think it changes it. I think you have to figure out what your key messaging is and to be super clear on that. I think you have to try and be as honest and transparent as you can, as much as a video will permit you to do that. But I think also it's having the ability to allow people to ask questions, which is much harder to do virtually in a lot of respects. But actually, I think people are more candid, oddly. I think people are much more open to typing stuff into a chat box than perhaps they would asking a very senior leader or a CEO that question. They will hide behind the keyboard a little bit more. So actually, I don't think it's hurt it. I think it's probably made it a little bit easier. But again, having those in-person meetings allows you to get a better feel of people. But I don't think that's necessarily the most important thing anymore. I think it's allowing that dialogue still to continue in whatever format it takes.
Thanks. We've got a couple of questions coming in. So one, it has been addressed to you mainly, Tanya, but I want to ask it to everybody. I think it's a really, really interesting question. So this is from Natalie Frank, and Natalie says, my question mostly for Tanya, but reacting to the success factors for change initiatives that you talked about. So what is your advice for leaders who are taking organizations through significant change driven by context that requires adapting, but without knowing exactly what the end state will be? So therefore making it hard to articulate the full benefits of that change. So where there is possibility, but the process demands that we discover the value. So, and I think this is very common for civil servants who will be in the audience. So things are constantly changing. So I'll start with you, Tanya, but then I'm also keen to hear from Greg and Audrey on this one as well.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I oddly don't think it's limited to public sector or civil servants. I think often companies, when they're embarking on any transformation, particularly digital transformation, they don't know what the outcome is going to be. They sort of have a journey in mind and they kind of want to get there. But I think, and I worked for a company previously who very much did not know how this was going to turn out. We went through a huge digital transformation and it could have gone very badly, truth be told. And I think the learnings are very much, still based around what I said earlier. I think one is honesty and transparency. Tell people that you don't know what the actual outcome is going to look like, but that you are working towards a journey of improvement or efficiency or cost saving, whatever that sort of desired outcome is from a business perspective. I think you can still share that. And I think being honest and saying, look, we don't know what this entire journey is going to look like, but we will commit to reviews, milestone reviews, iterating and changing as we go. But I don't think many change programs really have. I think we have a defined outcome, which is loose. I think being open about that and being open to the iteration and that process is the most important thing.
Thanks, Tanya. Greg, what are your thoughts on this? How do you do this when you don't necessarily know what the end point is going to be? You have to come off mute, Greg. Sorry.
All right, somebody had to do it for the call to be official. Where I think this is interesting is the journey often determines what the outcome is, and part of that is, I think it's actually a very positive thing of saying to your team, we need the input to determine where we're going to end up. We can't just say, hey, we're going to be this tomorrow or this in 6 months time or whatever the time frame is. What you decide to do and how you decide to change will determine what you end up as. And so it allows you to bring in that input, I think, a lot stronger and allow people to realize that they will have a direct impact.
Thanks, Greg. Audrey, this must be something that you're very familiar with, both in Hooper, but also with the organizations you work with. So your thoughts on kind of how do you do this when things are constantly changing?
I think very much that listening piece and reassessing why you're doing something and what your outcome or what journey you're trying to reach, what place you're trying to reach is really, really important to kind of keep reaffirming that. Go back to the original spec. What is it that you were trying to get to? Why are you going to, why are you making the changes? And really not allowing, although I agree with what's been said. It does become a journey, and things become more as you go through that journey, don't they? And you realise things that you maybe didn't realise before. It is about just trying to keep yourself on message. And I think there is something as well about transformation is about failure as well. There will be times when things go wrong, and it's very easy at that point for staff to turn around. We're all guilty of doing it and going, the old way worked better. Why are we going through this pain? It used to work fine. That phrase of, if it's not broke, why are you trying to fix it? All of that kind of comes out, and people want to go back to where they were beforehand. And I think it's really important to kind of keep your message on with, okay, it will happen. Things will go wrong. We will discover things that we weren't expecting, or there will be delays. That is part of transformation. It's learning from those and picking up again and moving along again onto where is the journey? Where are we trying to get to? And how do we adapt now with whatever's now presented itself, that we need to now adapt and move forward again?
Thanks, Audrey. I think that leads us on nicely to the second question that's come in. And I apologize in advance for my French pronunciation here, but the question is coming from Pascal Ilbudo, who said, Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, l'homme est un apprenti, le douleur est son maître. We did not adapt to change during the pandemic because we wanted it. It was forced upon us. So how can we prepare our society to adapt to an attitude of constant change to facilitate digital transformation? So I guess this is, how do you motivate staff not to think about this is just one program that they have to kind of complete, but this is going to be an ongoing process of transformation. Tanya, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Kind of hoping you wouldn't. This is a huge question.
But you can answer in French if you like.
There's too many French people here judging my French, so I won't do that. So I think it's a really great question, and and it's something I actually worry about, because I think the last 2 years, or however long it is, feels like forever, have taught us a lot about ourselves, how we adapt, and how we can overcome things, etc., and actually the importance of relationships and humanity, etc. And I'm very fearful that some of that will be forgotten very quickly. But I think to your point, and I think the question does lead very nicely to what you described, which is, how do you have this sort of constant feeling of being okay with change? And I think it sort of runs in parallel with learning. And I think if people can adopt a mindset of constantly learning, and that everything you go through is going to teach you something, whether that's, to Audrey's point, if it's a failure, it's taught you something, it's taught you the need to go back and readjust, or, the pandemic taught us lots of different things. And I think every individual learned something. And, there's and I'm sure lots of people would have already heard about it. There's a lady called Carol Dweck who kind of came up with the concept of a growth mindset, which is, if you look at everything as a learning opportunity, you constantly move forward, and you constantly iterate, and you constantly change. And I think that's really the only way, right? Which is to understand that change brings learning, brings self-development, brings ongoing skill building, which I think is really important, particularly in a skill shortage environment, which is, if you think that everything you do is going to allow you to learn, you continue to build your skills, you continue to become more valuable. And I think that works both for employers and employees, which is this new mindset of learning is something we all have to adapt to. Teaching society that, the tall order.
Yeah. Thanks, Tanya. I'm really conscious of time. I know we have to end exactly at 12:30, and we've got a couple more questions in. So actually, Audrey and Greg, I'm going to move on and come to you on the new questions that have come in. And I'm going to put them both together, actually, because I think they're related. So Momina has asked, when an automated tool is introduced to standardized processes, but it's inefficient and creates more work, yet management seems excited about it. However, they don't have a clue what burden it puts on employees. How can you resist ineffective and unnecessary change? And then similarly, I think Jeremy King has asked, isn't there a step before this? We often criticize the communication when it's actually the decision that is the perceived problem. So I think there's an issue of kind of trust in who's making these decisions about bringing in these things, and are they the right things in the first place? So it does come a bit back to that trust issue. Audrey, just in case you need to go, I'm going to ask you for your thoughts on these.
And I absolutely think that the answer to this is listening to your staff groups, and you do need to, if you're making decisions around change, you do need to do that kind of pre-work of understanding exactly what the impacts are going to be. And we've got real live examples of that at the moment, where there are new grant schemes out. There's the energy rebate schemes that are being launched by the government here to give money back to people. And it seems like a really straightforward process. You know, you can see the chief exec kind of going, great, we're going to give money back to all of the public, let's go ahead and do that, off we go. And actually being able to identify the right people, being able to identify how that payment works. And you really need to get to the people that are going to be making those payments and making that change, and understand exactly what the process is and what information they're going to be requiring before you put that kind of piece of change work through of how that's going to operate. So I do think there is a learning for all of us to not make assumptions and not to assume that we know how things work. Assumptions and I just assume is always my biggest fear in a conversation, that if once you've assumed something, you're probably already on the wrong track. So I think it's a lesson for all of us to remember, don't assume, find out and question, and make sure you really understand what's going on before you try to make a transformation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Audrey. Greg, we started with you. I'm actually going to come and finish with you for some sort of final thoughts. And I want to bring in the final question as well, and then you can have your general thoughts. So Anna has asked something about how to tackle this challenge of middle management being stuck in the middle. And I think hers is a plea, I think, for managers getting it from both ends, getting conflicting messages from both ends. So, and as a result, they end up being very confused about what they should be telling employees. So your thoughts on kind of middle managers in particular and their challenges, but then just generally some reflections on the conversation today.
Sure. I think what's critical for the middle management level is to take ownership and to not be scared of saying what actually you think needs to happen. Whether that's getting dictates from above that now need to be translated and worked into how do we actually work on a day-to-day basis, or taking the concerns of your staff who are in the trenches and making sure that that is well heard by the senior management, sometimes whether they want to hear it or not. And it's taking that ownership and realizing that is the role, that it's not an easy job when you're in the middle. You have to balance off the operational with the strategic. You have to take the tactical and strategic and merge them together to really make your organization work well. If you look at change over time, when we've done, I don't know how many demos, and we've said, well, right now, how are you doing X? And somebody proudly presents a binder and says, this is exactly what we do. And then somebody else in the organization says, oh, we don't do that. And somebody else says, oh, we do it differently. And you find out there's all these different ways of doing things that have been done. So it needs to be, you can't just say, let's go back to the old way. There isn't one old way. And so that middle management level really needs to take ownership of that and manage the conflicts that can come between the operational and the strategic.
Thanks so much, Greg. Did you want to say anything about any of the other issues that had been raised more broadly today?
The only one that I would like to come back to is how to support constant change. And I think what's critical is looking that we support our staff's mental health, recognizing that this type of change has been happening forever. It's not new. But it's intensified, and it's not going to part of it is, as our technology changes, as our personal use of technology changes, everything is sped up, and it's the new treadmill we're on, and it's ensuring we have the mental health breaks. It's ensuring that we have the time away to detach, and allowing people to do that, and expecting that they do that, not expecting that they check their email at 3 a.m. or that they respond to a call on a Sunday. If we're giving them the time, they need to have that time. And allowing people to recharge can then bring them back as refreshed, better workers, better able to meet the objectives of the organization. The only last thing I mentioned is please take a look at our documentation that we've supplied. As mentioned, it's in the chat, and it'll also be emailed to everyone. I want to take this time, though, to thank everyone. It's been a great experience for me talking with Audrey, talking with Tanya, and especially yourself, Siobhan. It's been enlightening. And I hope it's been good for the team. The participants overall. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg. I can't believe how fast the time has gone. It just leaves me to say thank you to the audience for sending in so many great questions. Thank you to you, Greg, to Tanya, and to Audrey for sharing so much of your expertise and time with us. If you enjoyed it, the audience, just to let you know, we will be sending you a link to today's conversation so you can watch the video again, you can share it with your colleagues, and there will be an article with a write-up of the key issues in a week or so's time. That will be sent to you again as well. And just to say, there'll be a questionnaire in your inboxes. If you could take a couple of minutes to fill that in, that would be wonderful, to make sure we keep giving you exactly the type of webinars that are useful for you. And as you can see there, one of our next one, quite ironic, given as we're doing this today, but all about Zoom fatigue. Staff communications in a hybrid organisation will be our next webinar next week. But thank you so much to Unit 4 for today, and to Audrey for being with us. And I hope we see all of you at another one of our webinars very soon. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks so much.